Well, that's a pretty dramatic comparison, wouldn't you say? What's this building? What's this building? An emissary from the back half of the room. You, Mr. Adidas. This. The royal something. Good. Help him out. Yes. In the city of?
Athens.
Yes. And the date is? What? Very end of the 6th century. Very end of the 6th century, in conjunction with the foundation of the new form of government in Athens, which is the democracy, founded in the very last decade of the 6th century BCE. Pretty much exactly the same time as the foundation of the Roman Republic. You can just imagine from the array of finds that occur in the Agora. There's handouts here. Handouts. That the Athenians were pretty proud of themselves and saw that big bully to the east, the Persian Empire, as a terrible thing where individuals did not have the autonomy and responsibility for their own selves and their own sense of government, where they lived under this self-regarding, overblown imperial entity. So self-regarding that that entity ought to be ripe for a lesson, a kind of a kind of takeover. Immediately after, just about immediately after, the Athenians established their new form of government, Hippias, the younger son of the tyrant Pisistratus, who had fled Athens in the year 510, could see that his future did not lie with his home territory, since he had effectively been legislated out of existence by the new government. So he traveled to Sardis, which was the closest Persian capital city, in order to appeal there to the Persian satrap. That's the satrap is the Persian governor. And the Athenians, enraged, sent a counter-embassy to argue against the Persians giving any help to Hippias. Within 6 years, the Greek cities along the coast of Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey, what is sometimes called Ionia, because the sea up here is sometimes called the Ionian Sea. So all of the cities that are along the coastal edge here are called Ionian. Please take a handout if you're just coming in. These cities all threw in their lot with the new governmental currents sweeping the Greek Aegean, the democratic revolution, and rebelled. Each rebelled against the Persians. And the Athenians sent military aid and moral support. And in the context of their assistance, they came to Sardis, the Persian capital city, and they burned it. And the Persian king vowed revenge. 8 years later, he sent envoys to Athens and Sparta demanding an apology for their blatant aggressive act of storming one of his cities and burning it down. And not only did the Athenians and Spartans not bother to apologize, they killed the envoys. That really ticked off the Persians. And within a year, a huge Persian force landed in Euboea, So the island of Euboea is right here off the coast of Attica. Lefkandi is on the island of Euboea. And they went to the main city on the island of Euboea, which is Eretria, burned the temple of Apollo there, and crossed the little strip of water that separates Euboea from Attica and landed at a tiny town called Marathon, where a small Athenian force utterly annihilated this huge Persian force. Casualties, 6,400 Persians, 192 Athenians. But 10 years later, the successor to Darius, Xerxes, regrouped, reinvaded, landed at Thermopylae, the Gates of Fire, in central Greece. The Athenians were very, very busy with the Midsummer Festival and could not send a force. The Spartans sent a force who were basically completely annihilated in turn by the Persians, who then, their way free, came all the way through to Attica, where they sacked and burned the Acropolis of the city in retaliation for the abomination of the Athenians invading Persia and sacking the capital city of Sardis. But 1 year later, the Athenians, with some help from various other Greek cities in their vicinity, defeated a huge Persian naval force in a battle just south of Attica itself, right about there near the island of Salamis. And the Persians retreated, and a kind of truce was declared between the Persian Empire and the folks in the Greek Aegean. And then the Athenians decided that what was needed in order to keep those bad Persians at bay was a military alliance. And they had all of the Greek cities around the Aegean agree to contribute to this military alliance, which is a kind of predecessor to NATO. And every city sent, every year, ships and money to bulk up and provide this defensive force. And the money was housed in the temple of Apollo in a sanctuary on the island of Delos, which was basically centrally located for all of the cities around here. And so this alliance was called the Delian League, D-E-L-I-A-N. And from 479, after the Battle of Salamis, through the next couple of decades, year after year, cities would send their contributions into the League. But as the years went by, many of these cities, which were actually quite small places and couldn't afford to build ships, began only sending money instead of ships. We have inscriptions that tell city by city what their contribution was year by year to the Delian League. And as the years went by, it's clear that the only city who continued to build ships, train sailors, and maintain a navy was Athens. All the other cities simply sent money. And as a consequence, by the 450s, Athens was not one among equals for this league, but effectively in charge of it. And in the year 454, the Athenians took the money from the treasury of the Athenian League and moved it to Athens. And then the chief statesman, a leader in the council, an engaging and aristocratic character named Pericles, made a speech to his fellow Athenians. And he said to them that they, the Athenians, owed no account of the money to the allies, provided that the Athenians carried on the war and defense for them and kept off the barbarians, meaning the Persians. For, Pericles said, not a horse do they furnish, not a ship, not a soldier, but money simply, and this belongs not to those who give it, but to those who take it. If only they furnish what they take it for. And now that the city was sufficiently supplied with the necessities for war, says the ancient biographer of Pericles, who wrote this down, they ought to devote the surplus of the treasury to the construction of monuments, from which in the future would come everlasting fame, and which, while under construction, would supply a ready source of welfare by requiring every sort of workmanship and producing a wide variety of needs. So in other words, the Athenians took the money for this defensive alliance from all of the contributing cities and used it to beautify Athens. The argument being that as long as the Athenians were prepared to protect everybody from the rapacity of the Persians, who incidentally showed absolutely no interest in mounting another set of attacks, and in the first place were simply defending their turf. As long as the Athenians maintained a defensive posture on behalf of everybody else, they could use all this money for a large-scale work, full employment project in the city of Athens. And that employment project was the beautification of the Acropolis, which had been sacked by the Persians in 490. Well, or 480, sorry. You're looking here at an aerial view of the Acropolis. There were 4 main buildings that comprised the building program on it. We will look today just briefly at 2. First of all, the main entryway, and second of all, the new temple that is built to one side of what had been the old Pisistratid temple to Athena. So first, the entryway. This had always been the main entryway up to the Acropolis, and prior to the construction of the new one, there was a much smaller, much simpler entry that demarcated the route coming from the traipse up the top of the hill and marking the official entry into the Acropolis. But the new entryway is far more monumental and beautiful, and we call it the Propylaea because that's Greek for entryway. And here you see a lot of people standing just below the main entry through the main door through the Propylaea up to the Athenian Acropolis. And you see that this entryway is graced by columns, normally associated with religious architecture, recently associated with civic architecture, now here lending a veneer of sacred space to what's simply a kind of doorway. Why is there this enormous elaborate entryway with, you may notice, the center opening between the columns on the main door wider than the ones to either side? Because this was the route through which the great Panathenaic procession would wend its way annually on Athena's birthday in midsummer. Where have we seen elaborate, monumental entryways? Where have we seen an elaborate, monumental entryway? Yes, name of the site. Name of the site. In Persia. Black hat on your head, or hat on your head. Name of the site. Persepolis. Yes, at Persepolis, where there was the Gate of All Lands and the Gate of Xerxes, absolutely monumental and adorned with magical winged man-bull sphinx figures. Here, the entryway to the Acropolis is elegantly simple, very refined, and without that kind of garish, imaginary, overblown, sculpted additions. When you walked through the Propylaea, you could just get a glimpse off to your right through the columns on the backside of the new temple that was built to Athena in her guise as a maiden. The word for maiden in Greek is Parthenos, and the temple came to be known simply as the Parthenon. Here you see it, the way it looks more or less today. Of course, this is a kind of old slide. This is the back end of the temple, the northwest corner. This is the west facade and the north side. So you're all coming out of the Propylaea now. This is the way it would look to you. So at an angle, at a distance, and of course in antiquity, complete and highly adorned with lots of sculpture decorating the upper parts. Pediments, two, one on the west, the other on the east. A frieze on the inside, which we'll get to in a minute. You can just see a glimpse of it right there. And the metopes, metopes, which are the flat panels alternating in the frieze course above the columns. For the most part, in Greek temples, metopes were plain. They were just a blank marble little stone slab. Sometimes metopes on the front and the back of the temple would be carved. Here, for the first time, the Athenians decided to have every single metope carved. That's 92. There were 92 metopes. They carried each in their size. They were 4.5 feet square, so a little under life size, height-wise. 4.5 feet square panels. And each one had a 2-person combat scene. And the subjects for all of the combat scenes were the same on each side. So because there were 4 sides, there were 4 different subjects. On the north side, which is this side here, the subject was the battle between the Greeks and the Persians in the Trojan War. On the west side, which is this short side here, the battle was the mythical battle between the Greeks and the Amazons, the warrior women of the north. No. But the Greeks thought they did, back in the day. On the east side, so the front end, the battle was between the Olympian gods and the giants, those barbaric, earlier cosmic entities whom the Olympian deities overthrew. Yes. Titans and giants. And on the south side, it was the mythical story of the battle between the Greeks and the centaurs, the rapacious, crazy when drunk, half horse, half human figures of Greek legend. In all of these mythical storylines, there is a force for good, usually the Greeks, and some out of control barbaric foe, not even human. It looks like it might be difficult to actually make out what was going on in the metopes, being as how they were up real high at the top of the columns, but in antiquity they were colored, which is always a sad, sad thing to learn about because they look so tacky in these reconstructions. And it really diminishes the allure of the Parthenon to imagine this, but you have to imagine it all painted up like a hussy. We only really have the metopes, for the most part, preserved from parts of the south side because in the 1600s, the Parthenon was used to store gunpowder by the people who lived in Greece at the time, and it was hit by a cannonball from the Venetians who were trying to take Greece, and the Parthenon blew up. The roof blew off, and a lot of the superstructure blew out, and that's why fragments of the sculpture were just laying around on the ground a few hundred years later when Lord Elgin came and picked him up and took him to the British Museum, which is where today many of the extant fragments can be seen, and including many of the metopes, such as South 2, 3, 4, 7, 30, and 31, which you see here. Now you can imagine the problem here. Just imagine if I said to everybody in this room, you're all on the metope team. You've got to come up with a two-person sculpture that shows a tussle, some sort of a battle between a Greek. In the myth, they're lapiths, and a centaur. And of course, that's complicated by the fact that the centaur has a horsey body, so you've got an additional pair of legs, to say nothing of a horse body, that you have to fit in to this 4.5-foot frame. It doesn't always need to be the case that the Greeks are winning, although more Greeks are winning than losing in these depictions. And different people approach this. Each of you would approach this if you had to make a sketch from a different vantage point, and some were more successful than others. I mean, if you've got a work team of so many people up on the Parthenon and everybody's busy chiseling out metopes, and there are 92 metopes that have to be made, and the entire Parthenon took 15 years from start to finish, 447 to 432 BCE. Some people are going to do a better job than others. So, for example, you've got this guy who could think of nothing better than to have the centaur pulling the hair of this lapith, and this lapith sort of crammed awkwardly into a corner, trying to, not very successfully, punch the centaur in the chest. And you can tell that a lot of people had very similar ideas for how to have these folks interact. So rearing up centaur and upright sort of knee first lapith, rearing up centaur and upright knee first lapith, these two unfortunately over-engaged in a kind of awkward tango thing and trying to get each other. The lapith is pulling the centaur's hair and he's trying to choke them, and their legs got all entangled and they can't get out. So as I say, some of these are more successful than others. My favorite, and most everybody's favorite, South 27. This is just the greatest thing, because this sculptor decided to really forget about the point that these two were supposed to be fighting each other, and instead produce this great vision of a lapith sort of with his cloak behind him in a kind of curtain setting him off as a sort of ta-da moment. So here he is, practically ignoring the centaur, who's just sort of exiting stage right, while he is busy showing off his six-pack abs. All right, so 92 metopes of tussles, more or less elegant. On the pediments, also a huge array of sculpture, showing, again, in each case, a single story. On the west side, a mythical story about which deity would win the contest to be elected chosen by the Athenians as their founding deity. Now, usually you might think this would be the other way around. It would be the deity that would pick a city. But for the Athenians had a much more self-aggrandizing story about themselves, and in their story, the deities fought as to which one would have the honor of being the patron deity of the city of Athens. And in the story, two deities fought, Poseidon and Athena. And they both they fought by giving presents, and whichever one gave the present that the Athenians liked the best, that would be the one the Athenians would pick. And the story in the Pediment was that Poseidon and Athena, who occupied the center of the Pediment, with rearing horses on either side, shades of the Centauromache metopes, the metopes that show the fight on the south side, are springing back. Poseidon gave as his gift a salt stream. He hit a rock with his trident, and salt water came out, which makes sense because he's a god of the sea, but is totally useless. Why would you want a saltwater spring? Salt water is no good at all. You can't water plants with it. You can't drink from it. So, no good. And Athena made an olive tree appear, and as we know, the olive is the cash crop of Attica, and so that was a good gift, and the Athenians picked her, and that's why Athena wins the prize, and she gets to be the patron deity of the city of Athens. So that's the story that's shown here on the west pediment, and on the east pediment, sadly blown up by the Venetian blast in the 1600s. In the east pediment, there was a beautiful story of the birth of Athena. Everybody knows this adorable myth. Zeus had a headache, very bad headache, called for the smith god Hephaestus to cleave his head in two, which would not be a problem because he was Zeus, so he couldn't die. So that was a handy cure. And out sprung, fully grown and fully armed, from his head, Athena. So that was obviously the cause of the headache. And that story, her birth, is what's shown on the east pediment, which is a beautiful thing which captures the moment in time. At either end of the pediment, the horses here of the sun coming up at dawn, the horses of the moon setting, so it's just the moment when the moon sets and the sun is arising. And in the corners, deities looking here, Dionysus looking at the horses of the sun. And then next to him, in growing awareness, two deities, probably Demeter and Persephone, turning towards the middle to observe the event that's happening. And on the right side as well, probably the most magnificent piece of ancient sculpture to have come down from us, the three goddesses from the east part of the north part of the east pediment of the Parthenon. You can see them if you go to London and you go to the British Museum and you go to the Parthenon galleries. They are in their glory there, over life size, fully carved in the round. Statues of deities, again in varying states of alertness from less to more, occupied, the one looking at the horses of the moon setting, but here looking at the events that are taking place in the center of the pediment. You might think that 92 metopes and 2 whole pediments would be enough sculpture. You would be wrong. Inside the entire perimeter of the building, above the columns of the inner walls, ran 40 feet above your head a 542-foot long continuous frieze. Unique. No Greek temple builders had ever made anything like this before. This was special just for Athens. And the subject of the frieze is the Pan-Athenaic procession itself. At the beginning, here on the west front, this character here is this character here. People are down in the agora getting ready So some of the young men are on their horses, and their horses are burning off energy, sort of prancing and stomping around, and some are still just getting their shoes on. And as you move along on the west side, some of the horses are cantering about, and some of the riders are trying to bring them in check. And as you move along both the north and the south sides, as you walk along, if you would look up, you would see, going along the south and going along the north, part of the procession, riders on their mounts. Again, like the metopes, colored, sad. So a blue background and all kinds of details picked out in varying colors. The horses would have been in different colors, the robes, so that in the dim light of the interior between the outer colonnade and the walls, looking straight up practically, because you can't really back up too much, it would have been hard to see what was going on. The frieze is 3.5 feet high, but no more than 3 inches deep at any place in its carving. So a tour de force of carving. Ahead of the riders, the elements needed for the sacrifices that would have taken place in the Panathenaic procession once it got to the top and to the front of the temple to Athena. The animals for sacrifice, here one of the steers being pushed along. Here are some of the people pushing along the steers. And if you're going to have 100 oxen being sacrificed on the top of the mount, and you're going to have fire, and there's no ready source of water, you better have some water to hand. And so people had to bring water to the top of the Acropolis for each one of the times that such an event occurred. And here you see the young men carrying the large water jars on their shoulders. And here's one who's taken a break, and he's put his water jar down, and now he's about to pick it up and hoist it so that he can continue along in the procession. All of the faces on the participants in the frieze are very solemn. They're very serious. They're focused. They look straight ahead. Nobody cracks a smile. They don't look sad. They look determined and engaged and very purposeful. The procession, in reality, wound its way back from the, so I'm standing back near where the propylaea is, along this north side of the Parthenon, and then would come all the way around here to the front. And the frieze, too, continued inside here all the way around and then turned the corner. And so on the frieze wall right behind the metopes on the east front, there were, coming up on the north side, some priestesses and women, and some of the important magistrates of the city here on the south side of the east frieze. And then when you get to the center part of the frieze, who is there but the Olympian deities themselves? All 12. All 12 of the Olympian deities are here. Artemis and Apollo and Poseidon and Zeus and Zeus and Hera are here. And this is Athena and can't remember who that is. Ready to welcome the people who are participating in the frieze. You see something very clever here, something that we already noticed on the Persepolis sculptures, which is that the heads of all of these deities will be more or less at the same level as the heads of everybody progressing up on the frieze, but the deities are seated. So in this subtle way, they are marked as being much larger, although when you just look up at them, their heads are all at the same level on the frieze. And they are turning here to the north and here to the south to welcome, to greet, or to look at the participants who are coming up along the sides of the Parthenon and turning the corners, which means that they have their backs to whatever is in the middle of the front of the frieze. The middle of the front of the frieze is this scene, which shows a priest and priestess of Athena and 3 youngsters who participate in the Panathenaic procession, and the youngest of the children is helping the priest fold a cloth, which is the robe, the ceremonial, newly woven every year robe that was brought in the procession and then was used to adorn the sculpture, the cult statue of Athena. This might look like a rather deflating, mundane, relatively unimportant kind of image to have be the culminating moment of this busy, crowded procession. But sometimes what you see, if you just isolate the characters and you don't imbue the scene with any of the deep feeling that you would have as a person of that culture, you can miss the point. So let me say that I believe that in ancient Athens, somebody looking up at this scene would have had the same kind of reaction and reverence in seeing this simple, thinly populated, elegant scene as we, for example, have when we would regard something like this. Well, what do the Athenians want you to think about them? Talk with the person next to you. Go. I'm going to start with you.
Me? Okay.
I'm going to go down this road. What do you think? Oh, yeah. What do you think?
Very religious.
Because it's the procession in honor of Athena?
And they like to party.
All right, tell me something. They're very serious. Yes, they're serious. You could say that they have a high regard, indeed, for themselves. I mean, that's the sort of demeanor that you adopt when you don't want anybody else to call you out, or you want them to take you seriously. Yeah, exactly. What else? The athletes in the games were almost idolized? Oh, so the participants in the procession, those aren't necessarily athletes. They might be, but they are the fighting forces of Athens in large part. I mean, all those young men on horseback represent the cavalry of the city. And yes, that's who the gods are watching, right? So the gods are more interested in the citizenry of Athens. And in fact, they're very interested in the citizenry of Athens. Is that your point? Yeah, nice. Next. And what are you looking at that gives you that sense? Oh, so for example, these, because these the metopes, all of the metopes would show these ancient myths. So this is supposedly a lapith, but who, in essence, are we to identify these valiant fighters with? The citizens of that community, right? Athens. And if this is Athens, who are the centaurs? The Persians. The Persians. Those not quite human folk who don't know how to accord dignity and individual respect to citizenry. Next. So there is this winning admission of mortality and some humility, huh? And because that would get old in a big fat hurry, huh? 92 metopes with the Greeks winning every single time? Spare me. And you can imagine that the people who were in charge of this project probably thought, all right, that might be a little much. Maybe not. So, right, there is some sense of modesty. Some sense of modesty. Next. Indeed, absolutely. All 12 Olympian deities, not usually gathered in one place, not usually effectively displayed for one city's behalf. That's quite the statement. Absolutely. Next. They're taking all your ideas. Anything else? They are amazing overall. The gods fight over them. Oh, the Athenians. They are just the cat's pajamas. Yes, indeed. The gods fight over them. Mm-hmm. What else? It's impossible not to believe that the Athenians did not have in mind the great processions sculpted on the Apadana in Persepolis when they decided to sculpt this heretofore unheard of addition to a Greek temple, this over 500 foot long continuous sculpted frieze. And the similarities are many, and the differences are striking. The two most important similarities and two most important differences between the Apadana frieze and the Parthenon frieze. Go. Apadana. This is the Apadana frieze. This thing along the top here. I'm going to call on your row. Start with you. Yes. Two most important similarities and two most important differences. Tell me something. The Persian one, on the Apadana frieze at Persepolis, there are people from all over the empire. Not so on the Parthenon frieze. Next. The Persians interact with each other. Now, I haven't really shown you, there are places on the Parthenon frieze with 542 feet of Parthenon frieze. You can imagine that there are parts that you haven't seen here. So there are, just to be completely fair, there are a few spots where riders will interact with each other a little bit more, mostly on the west front. But basically, you are correct. The very deliberate kinds of interactions between people on the Apadana frieze does not occur among the humans on the Parthenon frieze. It does among the gods. Yes, that's absolutely true. Next. The Athenian one is more dramatic because? Why do you say that?
Like those people carrying their drugs, like it looks like it's a huge struggle, but the Persians are just kind of walking with these little boats.
It's true that in the Apadana reliefs, people float along. There's no real effort being made. Even the people who are carrying, like there's a character, one of the delegates carries a baby lion cub. I didn't show you guys that one. Oh, it's so cute. He's so cute. He's like this big. He looks like somebody's carrying their dog. And the lion cub is just like drugged, completely docile. And the guy is just, no muscles clenched or anything like this. It's effortless on the Apadana. It's friendly and effortless. And that's not quite so on the Parthenon frieze. Next. That's you, I think.
The Parthenon frieze seems to be glorifying procession rather than the Persepolis frieze that shows procession giving tribute to a king.
So you don't think that the Apadana frieze is glorifying something or somebody?
Well, I do believe because it's a procession for the goddess Athena. It just seems to be showing that how hard the citizenry works towards doing that. While
So the person or entity for whom the procession is intended in the Parthenon frieze is who? Who's this for? The Parthenon frieze. Which god?
Athena.
For Athena. Who's this for? The king. Right. This is for the patron deity of Athens. This is for the Persian king. This is for a person who's here on earth. This is for a deity conceived as living on Mount Olympus. Both are for glory of the personage that the participants are bringing in effect tribute to. I mean, all of the oxen who are coming along up onto the Acropolis to be sacrificed will be sacrificed for Athena. All of the gifts that are being carried are being given to the Persian king. So there are gifts for each character. One character is human and of this world, actually speaking, and one is not.
Parthenon actually depicts gods as well as the does the god or the person that like it's a real person.
You could say in a way that the gods are brought down to earth on the Parthenon frieze. Anyway, they're there, right on the building itself. Darius or any of the Persian kings are not depicted per se on the Apadana. The size and the overwhelming force of the soldiery and all of the delegations amplify the greatness of the king without the king actually being present. There were a couple hands. One back there. Yeah.
The carving on the Apadana is a lot. It's obviously a 3D carving, but it looks more 2D. It has more of a flat, sideways sort of view.
That's true. The carving on the Apadana is not molded and is three-dimensional as the carving on the Parthenon frieze.
Is that just because the carving on the Apadana was done earlier, or is it because
No.
one Persian and one's Greek? Or
No, it's not either of those things because we know that there were Greek sculptors who worked on the Apadana. It's a style thing. This is how they wanted it. They wanted these images to be more or less flush with the outer plane of the block, and here the sculptors wanted to portray more depth. So they wanted these to be more lifelike, and they wanted these to be more contained. Yeah.
It seems as if the Parthenon frieze is glorifying the Athenians just as much as it's glorifying its gods.
Because
Because, like, for example, the ones with the centaurs, and like all of those are glorifying the Greeks. And
so all 92 metopes look to be spotlights on the abilities and excellent attributes of humans, here indistinguishable from Athenians. And so in a subtle, or maybe you don't think it's so subtle, way, the Athenians are getting just as much shine and polish to their image by invoking these stories that then reflect back on them.
I also think
Oh, wait a minute, Catherine.
Well, I was just going to say they are not on the same level in the Persian.
Who's not on the same level?
The Persians are not on the same level as the Greeks are on the same level. They're in Parthenon,
You mean the physical level where they are?
where their heads are, as you mentioned earlier. Stairs.
Here? Oh, well, they're ascending. I mean, this is actually a piece from the stairway. I don't know if I'm understanding exactly what you're saying. So they're coming up the risers.
Oh, okay.
Those are actually on the sides of the big stairways, and so as you go up, so do the sculpted figures go up with you.
Oh, okay.
So thank you for pointing out the difference in placement. What is this key? Is that what you're going to talk about? All right, let's hear it.
Okay, I think it's important because the Apadana seems like more part of the people, or like it's something, as you walk, they walk it, and here's what you do. And like the Parthenon, it does show like a human action, but by putting it up there, it's really, I don't want to say glorifying, but like
Elevated. Indeed. Don't forget the difference of placement and how this would affect what you're seeing. So to admire this, so you might say, oh, this could be me. I remember a few years ago when I was younger and I was one of the people who carried the big water containers up to the Acropolis in the Parthenon procession. Ah, yes. What a lot of work that was, blah, blah, blah. Well, maybe you would, but you would be seeing yourself 40 feet high on the wall of the temple itself. Perhaps you did not think of yourself in that way, but now you suddenly feel that you've gotten some kind of promotion. And here, just so, as has been aptly pointed out, these figures are with you. They are at your level. As you walk up the steps, so do they. They are the same size as you, not bigger. Well, we could go on like this for a while, but we have to proceed. So, three cultures, 3 societies, 3 different sorts of government, 3 different visions of themselves. And if you are fond of metaphor, you might think about how the different main celebratory communal event for each, the New Year's procession giving gifts in honor of the king, the Panathenaic procession bringing sacrifice for Athena, and the triumphal procession celebrating a military victory by the citizenry of Rome, each in its way harnesses what the citizens of that society thought most important and most worth celebrating and commemorating about themselves. Now, the thing about reading how a society regards themselves through their public monuments is that it's a rather top-down kind of view through the scope. So it's not the delegates themselves of the Persian king who chose to be portrayed or how they were portrayed. It was the imperial court in Persepolis deciding to memorialize the delegates by sculpting them on the Apadana. Likewise, in the 19th century, in this country, shortly after the Civil War, Union troops were memorialized here in the longest continuous frieze that had been carved in this country to date, a clear evocation of the Parthenon frieze on the Pension Building in downtown Washington, D.C. Very, very long frieze depicting Union soldiers marching off to war. So there is government, as we understand it, top-down through depictions and architecture. There is government, as we understand it, from the words on the page. Here, for example, the preamble to the United States Constitution: "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America." And then there are the remains that show how life was actually lived by regular people, real people, individuals at ground level. And the question is, do the words match the official depictions, architecture, and verbiage? So here, for example, this happens to be my block on a much nicer day than today. You might say that an archaeologist 2,000 years in the future would find direct evidence for some of this language in a plan such as could be made of this scene. What might be some of that evidence? You're not going to find each of these aspects necessarily reified in a plan here, but you will find several. Go.
Which building has the Union soldiers on it?
Which building what?
Had the Union soldiers on it?
The pension building.
Seems pretty tranquil to me.
But the question is, so if you're an archaeologist 2,000 years in the future, you would have a plan. You wouldn't have the grass, but you would have a plan. So you would have the sidewalk, you would have the steps, you would have the individual lots. You would see the lot lines. So you have to think about that. Yeah, you need a car for general welfare, wouldn't you say? All right. What do you think? What was the question? You flunk. Don't do that. Try to stay awake and pay attention. Next.
You could say that like the sidewalk showed general welfare, it's like a common way of common means and shared. It's like general community, everyone shared the common sidewalk.
A shared public amenity, the sidewalk. Indeed, general welfare. Next, something else.
You could say that we all have our own liberties because we all have our own space.
Everybody, each individual has their own lot, own autonomy. Exactly. Next.
Ourselves and our posterity, because basically it's a residential place. People live there, they have families there.
And you would be able to tell from a plan, even 2,000 years in the future, that each of these lots was reasonably sizable. Not poor and pinched and tiny and crowded, but...
Yeah, and you'd also find household things, assuming some of that was preserved.
You
could tell the houses.
Yes, or anyway, you would have the size of the houses themselves.
I don't know, like tranquility, if it sort of looked kind of the same way.
Well, it's going to be 2,000 years in the future. So, probably not. But, just wait till next Thursday when you all learn about garden archaeology and you find out that even 2,000 years in the future, archaeologists would be able to tell which plants were planted here. Oh, that's going to be so cool. Next. It's perfect. Oh, thank you. It is a very nice block. That's true. Well, what about, let's see. What about this? In order to form a more perfect union. The housing lots would be similar in size. In fact, the housing lots would be practically identical, one to another. A more perfect union would be a union in which no one person has too much more than anybody else or too much less than anyone else. Well, that's my neighborhood. We all know that if archaeologists 2,000 years in the future excavate enough different areas, even of the metropolitan area of Minneapolis and St. Paul, they may come to doubt that we all lived by and espoused the words here. We don't have words like that from the period of classical Athens at the height of its democratic self-regard in the time of the Parthenon. But we do know from the finds in the Agora that there were serious efforts made to ensure a more perfect government of the people. And we know from some of the towns that were established by Athenians that on the ground in individual private lives, those ideals were attempted as well. This is the town of ancient Olynthus. You have a handout. And it's labeled. It was an Athenian colony established in the 5th century BCE. It was excavated by Washington University of St. Louis from 1932 to 1938. And over 100 houses were excavated by them. You see here one of the blocks. Olynthus is located way up here in the northern, near the northern Aegean. So Athens is down here. Olynthus is way up there. And here is an aerial view of the excavation area and a plan that shows you some of those blocks. What you see is a town that was, yes, sir. This is from the middle of the 5th through the middle of the 4th century BCE. The town was laid out all at once in a grid. The streets were 17 feet wide. Each block was 300 feet east-west by 120 feet north-south. Each was divided into rows of 10 houses, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, with a common center alley between them. And while inside people could make small modifications as they like, just like we do, the footprint, the outline shows, just like my block in St. Paul, that each lot size, each house size was identical one to another. Each of the houses at Olynthus, in this section, there's one slightly ritzier section, were a standard size of 60 feet square. So you see that kind of alley that runs in between. So here's a house, and here's the one on that's behind it on the next street. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And you can see that the plan was such that they must have shared a common roof line. Because, for example, here's the center line of all of the houses on this block. And you can see again the center line, and it's in common. So that the pitched roofs of all of the houses would have been shared. So here's one of those little alleys running in between streets, and you can see that the houses had stone footings. They had mud brick walls, and then the mud brick walls were plastered, and of course the mud brick was protected by the fact that they had roofs, and you get a sense of the size of the rooms from this view. So on your handout, you have a plan of, I don't know if it's this house, it's not, but yet another Olynthian house. And you see the way that a typical Olynthian house was set up. The entryway came in from the south, and when you entered, there was an open courtyard. The courtyard supplied light and air and provided a gathering place for family and friends. And we know from the finds inside the houses, and you've got a key for that on your handout, which you will be able to study at your leisure in better light, not in here, that lots of finds from the courtyards and the other rooms of the houses let us know the sorts of activities that went on in these houses. So you see that the courtyard was the kind of centerpiece of the house. There were a few columns. Here are the footings for the columns, and here you can see them in reconstruction. And those columns allowed passage to more protected areas of the house, rooms that were arranged around the courtyard. And we are pretty sure that there were second stories in the houses. We have literary sources that refer to second stories. But as you could tell from the remains, the excavated remains, there weren't a whole lot of second stories found because, in fact, we've got nothing much higher than about your knee preserved at the site itself. Here are some of the finds from inside the houses. What's this? A door knocker. I love that. What are these? They are the loom weight things. They are the weights to the looms that people would have used to weave their textiles, their clothes, and so forth. Lots of loom weights found in the houses. Almost every house had loom weights, telling you that people produced their own goods for the most part. These are figurines of deities. There were frequently in houses found figurines representing various of the deities. This is probably Hera, she, and testifying to a kind of domestic piety, some small-scale household cult. There is a temple in the town on another hill. But what this tells you is that people inside their homes could have one corner perhaps dedicated for a small shrine. You need to eat and drink. Food, vessels for preparing food, for grinding things up, big bowls for mixing things in, cooking vessels of varying sorts found in the back rooms, in the kitchens. And also extremely much nicer dishes for entertaining. A jug for pouring wine, cups for drinking wine from. Here's another sort of cup for drinking wine from. What is this like? What does this remind you of? Those tribute bowls from Persepolis. Ooh, I forgot to put it on here. Where'd it go? Oh, well, I'll bring it back next time and show you. Yes, it looks just like the tribute bowls from Persepolis. That's exactly right. So for all of the Athenian bad-mouthing of the Persians, regular folks thought those dishes were pretty nice too and continued to make them and drink wine out of them. All right, we will continue with Olynthus and move on to other domestic sites. Next time, have a great weekend.